important, not needed, things like that. And then finally, he was on the verge of quitting a job and going into music full time because he was on the verge of a record deal. So he was excited about that. And she looked at him one day and said, "What a waste of a life." And he was offended, like that she would have that sort of comment about him. I mean, he had it going on, right? He was a musician. He was playing on the Sunset Strip. He had a record deal in pocket. And she told him that his life was a waste. And so she continued to witness to him, and he got saved. She won him to the Lord. He immediately, pretty quickly, quit all of that. He called people, he dropped the record deal, and he ended up, he was like 19 or 20 years old when all of this was going on. He sold his fancy car, and he boarded a train, and he went to Cleveland, Ohio, because he had a friend there that he wanted to stay with, and he wanted to get away from California. So he ended up going to college, and then he ended up going to med school in Dayton, Ohio, at the medical school there at Rice State University, or University of Dayton Med School, and then ended up in Indianapolis. But just a wonderful testimony about kind of abandoning a lifestyle and getting into something else. But through all of that, accumulated $250,000 in student loans. Right? And so he then ended up at Riley Children's Hospital, and he ended up coming to work for Cook, the company I worked for, that has since left to do other things, but still faced with that $250,000 in debt. Now you can go buy a house for $250,000, and it'll take you 30 years to pay for it, and you'll pay twice as much of that in interest. And so he looked at that and it's like, if I don't do something about that, it's just going to hang with me for the rest of my life, and that will always be there. And in that period of time, he got married and had 2 kids. And finally, they just came to a point where they said, we've got to deal with that. And so they sold the house they were living in. They went back to renting. They got rid of car payments. They essentially stripped everything down to no expenses, and they put all their money on that debt. In about 2 years, less than 3 years, I mean, they made good money, right? He's a doctor, and his wife was a professional, but they stripped it down, and they, as far as I know, they're essentially done with it, or close to being done with it. But it took sacrifice, it took focus, it took dedication to get rid of that debt. And that's really part of what this is about, is if you have those types of things to deal with, one thing I want you to get out of this, and we're going to talk a little bit more probably in another class about debt reduction, is to live your life and never buy anything on credit. Never get into debt. Okay? Is what I'm going to challenge you in. I mean, I didn't do that, right? I mean, Jen and I paid off $10,000 in credit card debt 3 times. Been married 28 years, and we didn't have a lot of college loans, which was a blessing. Financed a couple of cars early on. Okay, those are things I don't do anymore. Okay, we set kind of a standard and say we are not doing these things anymore. Okay, we still use a credit card, but we always pay it off. Now, there's some good advice out there, I think, about never using credit cards, and we'll talk about that. There is some good advice there. We do not finance automobiles anymore. Okay, we've been able to work through how to do that fairly successfully over time, but it required sacrifice. It required us living with 1 vehicle when we first moved to Indiana for like 3 or 4 years, which was a challenge, right, to shuttle people around and life with one vehicle, but we managed to do that. Anyway, so I'm going to challenge you in some areas like that. But so back to the budgeting, there were some good things that were mentioned, right? And these are all the major expenses that we have in our lives, right? The insurances and the mortgages and the debt reduction and saving for the future, or saving for those things that you're interested in. Maybe it's buying a house, maybe it is getting another vehicle, those types of things. There could be thoughts about college education, or your own education, you know, if you got kids, and there's a priority around all of those things. Okay, saving for retirement is an important thing. Brother Ron's in that space. I'm closer to that space than no doubt many of you are. But if some of you make it a priority now, it won't be an issue. All of this assumes that the Lord tarries, right, and he doesn't come back. But if he comes back and my finances are in order, I'm not going to care anyway, right? And I'd rather live with them in order as much as I can as time moves forward, rather than in disorder and chaos. So, right, so you have saving for those types of things as well. And all of those should contribute into that budget that hopefully you wrote down and started to work on. Probably another thing that I didn't hear anybody mention that you need to include in there is the fund, right? The fund money, right? That needs to be part of the budget too, because life can get really tough without, you know, the occasional eating out. We actually have in our budget an eating out, right, piece of it that we put in there for the quick stop at Wendy's on Sunday nights when Acts, you know, when they have Acts, so Jen and I can eat out or whatever, date night, right? That's part of the budget to go eat out. So those things too. Another piece on the budgeting, I don't know, are some of you familiar with Dave Ramsey's 7 Baby Steps? Have you read those or seen those? Okay, well, so I'm not, right? Dave Ramsey's 7 Baby Steps are trademarked, right? So I'm not qualified to teach on those, and I wouldn't do that, but you can go online and you can listen to him talk about them and read his book and stuff like that. So we will talk about them to some extent. And if I had studied those 20 years ago, I would have followed them for sure. And he pushes that anybody in any stage of life should follow those. And there's a lot of wisdom there. I don't know that, like, you know, Ron and I, with our stage of life, like, that all of them make sense. But in some sense, they do, right? His first one, but actually before his first one, if you take his class, he says, set up your budget, right? It's not even a baby step. That's like a prenatal step, is to set up the budget. And his teachers will tell the class, if you're showing up today and you're not willing to set up a budget, you might as well leave. Because, again, it's not going to help you. Okay, so you have to find the discipline within yourself to set up this budget and stick to it. You have to do that. We have to do that to be successful with our finances. His next step is, which is baby step 1, is to build an emergency fund. Why do you need an emergency fund? Well, because emergencies come up, right? Anybody be in a car accident lately? So, yeah. Anybody need major car repairs lately? Yeah. And a fuel pump go out on the Jeep. That was not cheap. You know, those types of things come up. Medical bills come up. Adam, I see like somebody in a cast. Probably medical bills. You know, even if it's co-payments or things like that. You know, those emergencies come up. How do we react to them if we don't have the money? What do?
Pray.
We pray. We might do without, or we'll put it on a credit card. That'll happen a lot. We'll put it on a credit card to pay for it because we don't have the emergency fund set up. Right. We might be able to make payments on things. They might charge us interest with that, or maybe not, but it depends. But it could be more costly if we're going to have to make payments on it. And that's going to impact that budgeting as we're making those payments, right? So that's why the emergency fund is so important as that baby step number one, because in Dave Ramsey's plan, he wants you to break away from the credit cards, okay? I mean, why do we want to give our money to MasterCard? Why do we want to give our money to Visa? I mean, like, go online and look at their buildings, right? I mean, they have huge corporate offices, beautiful buildings. You know, you look at them as they're actually not bad companies to invest in, right? Because they make money. There's no other marketing machine greater than Visa and MasterCard, except maybe Discover, right? I mean, why are they a marketing machine? Because they are making money on us, okay? They are taking the money that God has given us from us, and we're willing to give it to them. Let's stop doing that, right? Let's figure out how to stop giving them our hard-earned money, okay? So that's why the emergency fund is there as a baby step to break that cycle of relying on the credit cards, okay? Baby step number 2 is to get rid of all non-mortgage debt as soon as possible. That's his baby step number 2. Why? Because you're paying interest to MasterCard, you're paying interest to Visa. We're going to do the math on this. This is where the math comes in so people can see what is going on with the math on those things. And baby step number 2 for Dave Ramsey includes the vehicles. Get rid of the vehicle loans as soon as possible. And again, we'll look at the math on some of that, not today, but in a future class. Dave Ramsey calls the car payment the difference between the middle class and the rich. Car payment is what keeps the middle class from being rich. Okay, we're not supposed to strive to be rich, right? But just quoting him. Okay, the car payment, average car payment in the United States is around $500 per month. It's the average car payment. So we're talking about opportunity cost. What else could people be doing with that car payment, okay? Instead of putting it on a depreciable vehicle that's going to go down in value over time. So, okay, enough said on some of that. So those ideas about budgeting, and I mean, ultimately your goal is to get that balanced monthly budget to where you are able to live within it and set some goals as far as getting rid of various debts that are costing you money. So the Bible has some things, I think, about budgeting that are important to talk about. I will say too, I will mention Dave Ramsey because he's a Christian. If you're watching on YouTube or something, he's pretty aggressive. Sometimes I don't like the way he handles people because he's at times over the top. But he has shifted his approach to be more secular, right? To appeal to more people to use his program. And so I will say that I talked to Pastor a while ago about Dave Ramsey's approach, and Pastor, he doesn't like him. And he said because he doesn't believe in tithing. He thinks that should be last. And so I looked into that a little bit to try to understand that, because Dave Ramsey's 7th step is to give. That's the goal, to give generously. But if you watch some videos and watch Dave interact with call-ins, if a person calls in and says, I'm a Christian and I'm trying to figure out how to do big step 1, big step 2, so forth, he'll ask them, is your tithe part of your budget? That is a question that he asks. He recognizes that the tithe doesn't come at the end with the giving. The tithe for the Christian comes at the beginning with the budget. It's part of the budget, which we talked about here as well. So we got through that with Pastor. We still don't like everything Dave Ramsey does, but his baby steps make a lot of sense for a lot of people. And like I said, if I was younger, I would just follow them because they make sense. Okay. So let's talk about budgeting a little bit. First, Proverbs, and there's a ton of verses that I've referenced in these notes, and we're not going to look them all up because we won't have the time. But Proverbs 24, verses 3 and 4, through wisdom is a house builded, and by understanding it is established, and by knowledge shall the chambers be filled with all precious and pleasant riches. We've got to have wisdom to build our house, and this can be thought of both from a spiritual sense, right? Dealing with husbands and wives and kids to build that proper God-fearing, Christ-centered home. But our finances need to be established. We need to build that aspect of our house as well through wisdom and knowledge. And this is why we start with the budget, so we get an understanding of what we have and where it's going, and commit to that. And Luke 14:28, for which of you, intending to build a tower, sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he has sufficient to finish it? Okay? We have to look at the cost of doing things, right? What's the real cost? And usually when we purchase something, okay, you know, I think an automobile is a good example. You know, we look at that monthly payment. You know, we look at the convenience of having a vehicle that runs, right? It's new or whatever the case may be. But what's the real cost in that decision? Okay, the financial cost. You know, it costs us this much per month, but after a period of time, that vehicle is not going to be worth much. And what else could I be doing with that money? Which is what oftentimes is ignored. And so what's the real financial cost? And we'll get into some good examples. How do we start? We start with that godly vision. We commit to the tithe. Okay. Well, there are some other things listed in the Bible that we should give. Okay. And they're listed out here. We have to first remember that we've been purchased by God with the blood of Christ. Okay. And we're not our own. We now belong to Him. And so we are to give ourselves wholly to the things of God. And church and our relationship with Christ should be a focus in our lives, and we should give ourselves to the things of God. The Bible says we're to give attendance to the reading of God's word. 1 Timothy 4:13. Till I come, give attendance to reading, to exhortation, to doctrine. We are to study God's word and understand it, and talk to others about it. Boys are upstairs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We're told to give earnest heed to what we have heard concerning God and His Word. That's in Hebrews 2:1. Okay? In other words, pay attention to it. Listen to it. Apply it. We're to give ourselves continually to prayer. But we will give ourselves continually to prayer. Acts 6:4 says. 1 Thessalonians 5:17, pray without ceasing. Okay, we're encouraged to give thanks at all times for all things. Do you give thanks in everything? Okay, and then finally, which is where we are, we're to give of our time, talent, and our treasure. Okay, we should devote some time to serving God. We should devote our talents to serving God. We should devote some of what God has given us to give back to Him for tithe. Okay, so how much should we give? well, even more important than the quantity is the quality, right? God loves a cheerful giver. He loves the attitude around giving. When I started tithing, I did not have a good attitude about it at all. I mean, this was, let's see, it would have been around, what year was that? 2001, probably, that we, 2002 maybe, that Jen and I finally got grounded in a Bible-believing church in Cleveland Baptist Church in Cleveland, Ohio. And, we looked at what was going on there, and Jen had, sort of been experienced with tithing growing up as a teenager. I was not, and I didn't want to depart with anything that was coming in. Of course, that was also in the midst of probably trying to pay off one of those rounds of $10,000 in credit card debt at the same time. It just didn't make sense to me, the numbers guy, right? And so anyway, we did finally I just, okay, okay, I'm gonna do it. So I wrote the check, and we never stopped, right? We did it from that point forward. Still paid off the $10,000. We still occasionally bought cars that I wish we hadn't have, and financed those, and managed to get rid of those things. Okay, but the tithe really was a starting place. God absolutely started to bless at that point, moving forward. So, and it became, right, it wasn't cheerful at first, and I struggled with it, but it became a point where it became cheerful, that I could see God working in my life, lives of my family, my church, and it became a cheerful event. Well, even before the Jewish law was instituted, Abraham gave tithes. Somewhere he was taught along the way that that's what you do, that you gave tithes, and the references are shown there. And when you study out a couple of different references, which I've listed there in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, that in the agricultural space, there are actually 3 tithes mentioned in the Old Testament. There were 2 every year and 1 every 3 years, which is effectively 23.3% of what they brought in. Okay, so that's a pretty, that's more than 10% on an annual basis, for sure. The tithe is holy unto the Lord. It doesn't belong to us, and if we get hold of that it does not belong to the person, it belongs to God. Okay, and Jesus charged over in Matthew not to neglect it. He said, don't neglect the tithe. There are some New Age Christians that will, and I've had videos pop up, right, that talk about this, because I've watched various videos that basically use various passages in the New Testament to say, well, you don't, it's not really required. You just do what is laid on your heart. Yeah, it's not there, right? Jesus said, don't neglect it. Okay, we are to tithe at a minimum. Okay, and God will pour out blessings, right? Malachi, let's turn there, right? Those are kind of the most well-known verses. Malachi chapter 3. It's the last book of the Old Testament. Malachi chapter 3, verse 10 says, bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house. And prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. And I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes, and he shall not destroy the fruits of your ground. Neither shall your vine cast her fruit before the time in the field, saith the Lord of hosts. And all nations shall call you blessed, for ye shall be a delightsome land, saith the Lord of hosts. So God's calling us here. I mean, he's speaking to the Jewish people, right? The Israeli people, but it applies to us as well. And he challenges us to prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts. Tithe and a blessing will result. Sometimes we don't always see it, right? It might come later. It might not be a financial blessing, okay? But it will come, and he challenges us. Well, the tithe is 10%, right? That's what tithe means, okay? It means 10%. For us, it should be 10% of our pre-tax income, okay? So you get that check, you go to the gross amount, you know, maybe it's $500 a week, whatever the case is. And then the government takes out their, you know, $120 or whatever they take out, okay? But that 500 is what we should be tithing on. So 10% of that's $50, okay? That should be that weekly tithe in that example, okay? Now, people sometimes ask questions, well, if I receive, you know, some other income, should I tithe on it? And my answer is yes. Anything you receive, you should tithe on it. Do your kids tithe on birthday gift money? Okay. I have always made mine tithe on birthday gift money. That's something that they received. It's a gift from God. It's a blessing. Tithe on it. Do you have a garage sale and you make some money? Do you tithe on that? I think the answer should be yes. Again, that's not money that you had. So just any examples. And then as we grow and opportunities arise, we should look for ways to go beyond the tithe. Okay? And we see that with you know, requests here to update the sound system, or to, you know, support you know, a visiting missionary. We got Brother Carpenter here today, and things like that. Where we get into challenges, right, is that if we don't build this foundation of the budget and sticking to a plan, we never get to the point where we can go beyond, right? It doesn't happen, okay? So you might think about your current situation and say, well, you know, I can't do anything today. That's okay. Let's put a plan in place so that by next year or the year after, you're in a completely different space, right? Okay, so commit to the tithe. It's a fundamental first thing. Save for an emergency, right? That's that emergency fund. You might say, well, Brother Scott, I can't, you know, can barely pay the bills now, right? How am I supposed to save for an emergency? Okay, start with something little. I don't care if it's $1, because it's an attitude of having a goal, laser focused on a goal to save for an emergency, to save $1,000 for an emergency. You got to start somewhere. So you start with $1. Okay. Usually what happens, if you can save $1 a week, after 3 or 4 weeks, you think, this is dumb. I can do better than this. And it becomes 2, then it becomes 5, and within a few months, it's there. You start avoiding, you know, the fast food for lunch, and you pack a sandwich, or you avoid stopping for coffee and you make some at home. All of those things start to accumulate. $1 here, a couple dollars there, and so forth. Pretty soon you have that emergency fund saved. But you gotta be focused on it. You gotta be dedicated to it. You gotta be patient, okay, for it to get there. And this is responsible, right? It's being responsible with God. It's being responsible with our family. Proverbs 21:20 says, there is treasure to be desired and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man spendeth it up. Okay? The dwelling of the wise, so your home, there's treasure there to be desired, and there's oil there, meaning there's wealth there. There's things that are of value there. And again, we can always apply these to to our family, to our children, those things also. But it says a foolish man spendeth it up, right? A foolish man is going to just waste all of that on whatever. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways. So watch the ants and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer and gathereth her food in the harvest. Right? So God put in the ants this desire to go out and gather and save up for when the difficult time comes. For them, it's going to be in the winter, where there's no food. We enjoy kind of watching some of that, and I'm sure you guys do too, right? The squirrels, that's what they do too, right? They store stuff up, they bury it. Jen hates it because they dig up the garden and put stuff there, and then next year you have some random tree or something popping up. But that's what they do. They store it up, they save it up for a difficult time that's coming. Proverbs 22:3, a prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. Okay, a prudent man's going to look ahead and see that, life is just this way. There's challenges that are going to be coming. We could be in the midst of them right now, or just know. The car's going to break eventually, right? It just is. They wear out. Something's going to be coming. And so the prudent man's going to look ahead and say, I know these things are coming. I know that they're going to happen. And so I'm going to start now and prepare for it. So save for that emergency fund. And, for the married folks, you have to talk about how to do this, right? Get agreement on the budget. You have to decide what's an emergency, right? The pizza guy ringing the doorbell is not an emergency. I guess it could be to you, but it shouldn't be, right? So if you got that emergency fund over there in the drawer in the envelope, the pizza guy needing paid, shouldn't be. That's where we go to pay the pizza guy, right? Okay. And then, after that emergency fund is saved, put a plan in place to get out of debt. Okay, and we will probably talk a little bit more about, but there's all sorts of approaches to that. There's Dave Ramsey uses the snowball method, okay? And that's if you have multiple debts to get out of, you do the one that has the smallest balance first. So if you got a Macy's card or something that has $500 on it, and that's your smallest one, you get that one paid first. It's psychological, right? It's a motivational thing. You get that one done first, you're motivated by it because it happens fairly quickly compared to the others, and then you apply the money that you use for that one to the next highest credit card debt or whatever the debt is. So that's the snowball method. There's also the avalanche method, which some people tout, which is highest interest rate card first. The highest interest rate debt, you do that one first. And that's, from a numbers standpoint, it's better. From a psychological standpoint, it's probably not as good, because if it's not if it's a higher amount, it takes longer to pay it off. But again, getting out of debt is a focused thing. You got to be laser focused on it, okay? and make it happen. And then there's other things when you get to the next stage, right? Then there's other things to save for, and your priorities on those can be very different. I will say, for in terms of priorities, people should save for retirement before you save for your children's education, as an order of events. Okay. And I think this makes a lot of sense. The reason for that is that your kids aren't going to fund your retirement. They're just not going to do it. Okay? Maybe in a rare case, you probably get some help, right, from them, but you won't want to do that. Okay? So, anyway. a lot of us are maybe a long way from that, but as you get to thinking about it, think about those priorities. Okay, once you get out of debt, stay out of debt. Okay, the Proverbs 22:7 is a verse that Dave Ramsey cites all the time. I hear it say all the time. The rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. It's absolutely true. Okay, when you owe money, you're a servant to that thing. You are working for that, whatever that. You're working for MasterCard. You're going to work in the morning. You're clocking in, and who are you working for? You're working for MasterCard at that point. Now I'm working for the Lord. Okay, great, but you still have that MasterCard bill to pay off, or that car payment, or whatever the case is. You're working for that group. I put in Psalm 37:21, the wicked borroweth and payeth not again, and Christians shouldn't be in that state, right? But the righteous showeth mercy and giveth. We shouldn't be in a state where we're borrowing and payeth not again. It can get out of control, where you get so much debt that you can't pay it again, that you can't pay it off. And no Christian should ever find themselves in that state. And that's not something we're going to really address here. If that is something, where you find yourself in that state, I'd be glad to talk to somebody about that. But the righteous, okay, the blood of Christ makes me righteous. I'm not righteous, but his blood does. And because of that, I'm able to show mercy. And if my finances are in order, I'm able to give both of myself as well as my treasure. So we shouldn't contract debts beyond our ability to pay them. I like the woman of 2 Kings, where she was able to accumulate the pots of oil. I won't read the whole passages there, but it's 2 Kings chapter 4. By faith, she did as the man of God said. She had her sons go and collect all the pots, brought them in, and then they started filling them with oil, and the oil just kept coming out. She was able to fill and fill and fill until they ran out of pots. And she looked at her son and said, "Why didn't you get more pots?" But what she did after that is important, I think, to note as well in this context. She first paid off the debt. That was what she did first. And then she lived on the rest. Okay. She didn't pay off part of the debt and said, "Oh, I'll pay the rest later," and wait. She paid it all off first. She made it a priority to pay off that debt first. Now she got that windfall, right? But how she used it at that point in time is important to note. She paid off that debt. All right, number 2, make sure everyone is on board. We touched on that. So husbands and wives got to get together on it. Got to be on board. You got to be in agreement. You can't have somebody spending outside the budget while somebody's trying to keep the budget. Can two walk together except they be agreed? Okay, they got to be on the same page. And there's lots of verses listed there that reference that. And then keep records as you go along. And that may be paper records, that may be a budgeting app, okay? And we can talk about, not today, but there's a gazillion budgeting apps. Some are better than others. Some are free, some will cost you $1 a month. Some of the banks have really good. We use Huntington, they have a really good budgeting app. They link all the accounts, everything's in there, you can set up categories. It works really well, but you need to keep records because you need to know where that money is going, what's coming in, what's going out. And then the last quote there, right? People say money talks, but actually it just walks away quietly. That's exactly what happened. It just walks away quietly. Pretty soon it's gone. You don't know what happened to it. All right, we'll stop there. Any questions? Comments? Ron, would you close us out in prayer today? Oh, yes, sorry, thank you. Homework. We do have homework. Before we close out, the homework. Again, by wisdom, we can build the house. So, what I'd like for you to do is do just a little bit of math, and if you have trouble with it, I'd be glad to help work through. What percent of your income in September was paid to the government in taxes? Do you know that? So go back to your September paychecks. It's listed on there, local tax, state tax, federal, FICA, Medicare, Social Security tax. Miss Nellie, I know what yours looks like because I print your checks. So I can help you figure that out. I can help you figure that out if you need me. But what percent goes to taxes? And then this number 2 is harder. Unless your answer is 0, that makes it easy. What percent of your income in September was paid in interest? Okay, was paid as interest on your mortgage, as interest on a car payment, as interest on credit cards. So the credit card statement will tell you, right? It'll list the number there that was applied to interest. The mortgage and the car loans will be a little more difficult. If you have a mortgage, you can go back to the amortization schedule. It's usually like about a 20-page, and it just lists the numbers for every month, and so forth. Or I can point you toward, there's online tools that'll help you calculate it if you know some of the input parameters, and same thing with the car payment. Okay, you can go to online tools to look it up, and I can point you to some things as well if you need help with that. Okay, but some portion of your income was paid in interest, and so you can get an idea of how much you're funding MasterCard, Visa, how much you're funding, I don't know, Ford Credit or Toyota or anybody like that as well. And the goal, of course, is maybe to push that to 0. I'm not going to have you do anything much with this, but it's a number that I hope will motivate you to try to reduce it. My personal one is not 0 because I have a mortgage on the house, and I would love to get rid of that someday, but not yet. But thank you. You want to pray us out then? Thank you.
Well, you came from trading for another day you've given to us. It's cooler, it's raining, for the day that you created, and today we rejoice in. Thank you for this God and this concern for the way we walk close to you, the information you've given him to give to us. Lord, we